I'm Thomas Smith. I'm a technology journalist and the CEO of Gatto Images, and I also have worked in AI for over a decade. And this is Tom Talks Tech, a new podcast where I'll share perspectives on everything in technology and the technology world, from cooking to crypto. Join me here as I explore the world of technology on Tom Talks Tech. I'm Tom, and today we're talking about bagels. Specifically, we're talking about the best bagels. And I think before anybody would have said that the best bagels are located somewhere on the East Coast. Maybe New York, maybe in New Jersey, certainly not on the West Coast. Because until very recently, there really wasn't a good bagel out here on the West Coast. And I'll get into some of the reasons why people think that might be the case. But in any event, there wasn't really anything out here. Now, last week, that changed, or the perception of that changed, as the result of a New York Times article, which concluded that the best bagels in the country were no longer in New York, they were actually in Berkeley, California. And specifically, they came from one particular place. There's several mentioned in the article, but the core place in the article was Boichik Bagels. And Boichik Bagels is on College Avenue. It's in Berkeley. And it's owned by a woman named Emily Winston. And the New York Times concluded that her bagels were better than the bagels in New York. And as you can imagine, that prompted a big kind of outpouring of anger on the part of many New Yorkers, disbelief, but also here in California, quite a lot of excitement. And I've been covering this for a while, so with due respect to the Times, I had started to talk about Boichik around Hanukkah this year in early December, and I covered them in a story I did in the bold italic on Medium about the Jewish businesses in the Bay Area that you could support for Hanukkah. And I tried Boichik's Bagels as part of that story. I was very skeptical when I heard about them. Somebody said to me, this is the best bagel in the Bay Area. It's just as good as a New York bagel. I didn't believe it. I went in and tried it and really found that it was as good as a New York bagel. So I covered Boichik in my original story. And then in January, after having eaten a lot of their bagels, tried a lot of their different ways of serving the bagels, trying their delivery, walking and standing in a line at their Berkeley restaurant, which can take up to half an hour, ordering online, trying their different products like lox, cream cheese, even their black and white cookies, just another New York staple. I decided as of January that it really was true. They are the best bagels in the Bay Area and rival the quality of bagels in New York. And I published an article in early January saying that they were the best bagels in the Bay Area. So the Times is late to the story, but at least they did cover it. And obviously they have quite a lot of clout, especially in the New York area. So as a result of this story in the Times, Boichik's business has exploded. Interest has exploded. Many New Yorkers have exploded at them. And that's what I covered in a recent story on the bold italic following up. And for that, I spoke to Emily Winston about what it's been like to be declared the best bagel place in the country, what it means for her business. And she described the experience of being covered in the Times and the demand that came out of it as completely bonkers. So since the article was published, she's had lines around the block to her store in Berkeley. Normally, Boichik did delivery and online ordering. That has all filled up for the next 3 weeks. So if you want deliveries, I think they're all full. If you want to pick up bagels at the restaurant with a pre-order, you have to wait at least 3 weeks. And there are, though, still bagels that are available if you want to walk up. You don't mind waiting in a 30-minute line to get your bagels. You can still walk into the restaurant. They say they have plenty of bagels available. So you can get them, just requires a lot of work. And Emily Winston told me that she thinks that's unsustainable, that's not reasonable to have to wait a month to get your bagels. But I think, again, it speaks to the quality of what she has created there. And when I spoke to her and did research on Boichik, one of the things that stood out to me is that her Jewish background, her background as an East Coaster, and her memories of childhood bagels really inspired the work that she's doing at Boichik. And specifically, she told me that she remembers eating H&H bagels from Manhattan that her father would bring back. She remembers going to bagel places with her father, and that as a Reformed Jew, she always identified as Jewish, but was never very religious. And that going to H&H in Manhattan felt like more of a religious experience, more sacred than her own synagogue. So that's the seriousness with which she takes her bagels, and also the connection to that past, connection to family. She remembers eating bagels with her grandmother. Her grandmother gave the store its name, which is a Yiddish expression for a little boy, young boy, kind of a term of endearment, Boichik. So that background, that Jewish heritage, that family history, and in particular, that history of eating East Coast bagels inspired the creation of Boichik Bagels. And in particular, it was the demise of H&H Bagels, or at least the version of the store. I think the brand has been carried on, the version of the store that Winston remembers visiting with her father as a child. And when she learned that H&H had gone under, she said it was like losing a loved one. It was a grief process that she went through, that bagel wouldn't exist, and then a feeling that she needed to recreate it and needed to have a way to still have this amazing bagel experience. And she's an engineer, hoping to cover her engineering background and how that contributed to the whole process in a future article. But being an engineer, she took a very analytical approach to duplicating or recreating the bagel that she remembers. And she told me all about choosing equipment, about figuring out the exact kind of water and kind of oven and dough, and making these bagels initially in her house. She got a cottage food permit, which allows you to sell certain items out of your home in California. Started selling the bagels, making them 18 at a time, and ultimately had so much demand for that, again, lines around the block to her house to buy the bagels, that she ended up creating Boichik as a restaurant where you can come in and order your bagels. Right before the pandemic happened, really, she had launched her brick and mortar business. So a lot going into that, a lot going into creating this bagel. But, one of the reasons I think that she has succeeded, and one of the reasons that you couldn't get a good bagel on the West Coast before, comes down to differences between West Coast chefs and East Coast chefs, or bagel makers at least. And when the Times looked at bagels on the West Coast the last time, which was in 2015, their conclusion was that West Coasters couldn't make a good bagel because we were too innovative. The West Coast chefs are always wanting to change things, to tweak, to make things gluten-free, to add sourdough starter to everything, and really to take something and reinterpret it according to their own vision. And that works wonderfully for things like artisan farm-to-table food, works great for creating more sustainable supply chains for food, but bagels are really very traditional, and they're very rooted in the past, they're very rooted in memory and family and all of these food ways that have developed in particularly Jewish communities, Ashkenazi Jewish communities, over the last 5,000 years. And so to innovate doesn't necessarily make bagels better, and in fact it often makes them worse. And so I asked Winston about that, and her feeling was that because she came from an engineering background, her goal was really to duplicate an existing bagel, or at least one that she had existing in her memory from H&H, rather than to innovate, that helped her to get where she is. And also the fact that she came into it as an engineer and not a chef. She said she doesn't have a horse in the race in terms of, innovative chef kind of things, but she brought in food people who knew how to run a restaurant, and applied her own engineering background to creating the bagel, recreating the bagel. So she wasn't really trying to create something new, she was trying to duplicate something that she felt in her memory was already perfect. So I think that helped to create what she created, and with Boichik Bagels, they serve really a lot of the traditional kinds of bagels. So everything, onion, egg, salt, which is one of my favorites. There's a little bit of innovation in blending certain flavors. So there's an eggy thing, for example, which is an everything bagel made with an egg bagel. They also sell all kinds of other products. Really excellent lox, which is smoked salmon. They sell the accoutrements you'd need to create lox and bagel, capers, onions, tomatoes, that kind of thing. For Passover, they're selling a matzah brittle, and just a lot of different products around that same concept. And a lot of the Jewish culture ends up in that menu. Not only the name of the restaurant, but there's several other items on the menu that use Yiddish terms. There's a large party platter, the big macher, which is a Yiddish term for somebody that's a big spender, a big shot. It's a $245 platter. So a lot of it's just these sort of playful uses of Yiddish and of that Jewish background and Jewish culture worked into the menu and worked into the food. The ordering experience is like that too. Anybody who's gone to a true deli or bagel place on the East Coast, especially in New York, knows that the ordering experience is it's been compared to like the soup Nazi experience in Seinfeld. And this is a West Coast approach to that, much friendlier, but there's a certain amount of automation, but you're not putting your order in on a kiosk. You basically wait in a 30-minute line, and then there's an older woman sitting behind a plexiglass screen with a space heater and a tablet, and you basically scream your order across a 6-foot distance, and she takes your order manually and puts it in to the tablet. And so there's a personal touch to that. I like how when you go there, if you ask for a dozen bagels, she always reminds you that you saved some money because you get one free when you do that, which I think is again, just part of that kind of hands-on personal experience of ordering there. So there's a lot of that bagel culture wrapped up in Boichik, and I think that's part of what makes the experience really great. And of course the bagels too. The bagels are just amazing. They're dense, they're malty, they're not kind of crumbly like a lot of West Coast bagels. And again, I think a lot of that is down to the engineering that Winston puts into this, tweaking the alkalinity of her water, for example, so that it produces the perfect bagel. Researching bagel making machines, and does she want to do hand rolling of bagels, which is very labor intensive, doesn't necessarily yield a better product. Looking at how did they make H&H bagels, and in fact those were not made by hand, they were made by machines. So choosing to use bagel rolling machines and just all of this thought and effort put into creating these perfect bagels. So after the Times article came out, her business is booming, unsustainably so. She's thinking about how can she expand Boichik without ruining the bagel, which is obviously the most important thing to keep the quality of the product excellent. And she's dealt with a lot of excitement, also some negativity, some haters. Somebody apparently called the restaurant to scream at her manager and call her names, somebody from New York. She said when she read the comment section of the Times article, she was afraid people might come with pitchforks and torches to her restaurant. People seemed so angry. I even experienced that with my own story. When I published my story in the bold italics, somebody wrote about it, three or four paragraph response saying how much they didn't like this concept. And I said, well, go try the bagels. And they actually, basically, I think despite me, did. Went there the next morning, probably waited in a 30-minute line just to try the bagels, just so they could tell me how they were inferior to East Coast true bagels. Which to me says, that people are really feeling inspired by this, whether it's inspired to embrace the new bagel culture of the West Coast, or inspired to remember the bagel experiences they've had before and, complain about how this isn't as good, even though they acknowledge that the bagel was excellent. But I think that says something about the importance of bagels in people's lives, that somebody would read an article on the internet and feel so passionate about it one way or the other that they wake up early the next morning and stand in line, eat a bagel, just so that they can write a 3 or 4 paragraph response saying they didn't like it. And I think Winston's dealt with that. She's dealt with a lot of happiness and positivity, and a lot of disbelief. One of the things that she compared this to was the Judgment of Paris, which was a famous tasting where Napa Valley wines and a blind tasting with French sommeliers bested several French wines. The French didn't believe it at the time, but now Napa is on the map as this major wine region with wines just as good as France's. One of the critics in that tasting, when she saw her scorecard, apparently tried to grab it back from the organizers so she could tear it up and preserve her reputation. So I think there's a lot of that happening with people here, and maybe there's a blind tasting that should be done at some point, maybe after the pandemic, when flying to New York is more reasonable. But, from here, I think she wants to continue to expand Boichik, to bring these bagels to more people. And she told me one of the things that she loves most about running Boichik and about this exposure and interest is being involved in new bagel traditions that people develop. Being able to provide bagels for a baby naming or a bris or even a shiva, and to be involved in people's bagel experiences here on the West Coast. And ultimately that makes her the happiest, to be involved in creating the kind of bagel traditions she created with her own grandmother and father and family on the East Coast, to be able to do that now for new families, for people here out west. And that's what she said bagels are ultimately about. So if you want to read more of the interview and my research and thoughts about Boichik bagels, head to the bold italic on Medium. You can follow me on Twitter at TomSmith585. Please subscribe here wherever you're listening to your podcasts. Share this with a friend too if you think they might love or hate the concept of the best bagels in the world being in Berkeley and not New York. Love to hear people's feedback on that. And try the bagels. Go to Boichik in Berkeley. You can place an online order on their website after things calm down, or you can be like the person who read my article and felt inspired and go right to Berkeley and stand in line and get your bagels today. Thanks for listening.